now we're going to switch it towards going over where we are currently with like our standings, players that I'll talk about some players that I thought have like impressed me thus far this season, maybe some strengths and weaknesses as well to talk about, and just going down the list from 1 to 31 in this case. So Grand Valley right now sitting number 1 in the country. They're 11-0. They're doing what Grand Valley dodgeball does, and that's winning dodgeball games.
Just another day in the office for them.
Just another day in the office for them, like you said. One of the things that I would say that is still great about them is they are just, they're able to plug pieces wherever they need to. They lost a lot of talent from last year's team. They lost guys like Brandon Meisel and Sam Stockdale, and even without those types of guys on the court, like, they have their own style that they want to do, and they are able to do it well and at will, which you really like to see. I would say that, like, right now the biggest weakness for Grand Valley's team, and this is sort of a situational thing, but when they struggled, I saw when they struggled, it was always whenever they were on a side that like had a wall.
Yeah.
And so they don't do a great job of adjusting to wall ball if teams do decide to play it. And I know that's a factor of their home court, and a lot of the other Michigan schools don't typically have like walls that are really close to the court. But
right,
that's something that they're gonna have to figure out a little bit more, because the Miami game in the second half, when Miami was able to come back on them, it was a result of being able to utilize that wall a little bit more. And for a team that like Grand Valley that likes to play really quick and make quick throws, they just got to be able to stop those rollbacks, and make sure that they get balls in their hand to be able to do those counter type of plays. So that's my biggest thing. Now, like I said, that's really situational.
Yeah.
And even if they do find themselves again with their literal backs to the wall, sort of, so to speak, they're a gritty team and a talented team nonetheless. So
yeah,
definitely deserving of the number 1 spot. Number 2 right now, Towson University. We sort of talked about some of the issues that we saw with them, and sort of like I said, like lacking that anchor a little bit, but they're a team that I think that they're going to surprise people, in the sense that I sort of don't see a situation where they don't make the Final Four personally. And I know that's a little bit of a big thing to say, but I'm gonna explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was talking to John and Shaw when I saw their first tournament, because I've seen every single Towson game thus far, and he flat out asked me, "It's like, is Towson like rebuilding or like they're reloading?" And after I saw them play against JMU twice, like, they're not rebuilding, they're reloading. Like, they're not far from where they need to be. They just have adjustments that they need to make. So for you to say like they could, make it to the Final Four, that's not crazy talk. They just got some things they need to work on.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes, and this isn't per se on court things, but to this point last year, I think Towson had played like through like mid-December. I think that they had played like 15 or 16 games.
Yeah.
And right now they're at 7 games.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, with like the Southern, when we were talking about the Southern teams, more dodgeball is only going to make your team better.
Yeah.
Towson's played some really talented teams. They played, like you said, JMU twice, Ohio, Grand Valley.
Yep.
So they've played some good teams. Now they just got to do it more often.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they're going to. I don't think there's going to be a lack of effort on their part in the second semester to try and get that done.
No.
And so that aspect, I think, is going to, continue to like enhance their experience. Like I said earlier, Colin Mormon coming back is going to be like really big for them, because I think he is that guy who he has the potential to fill in that anchor role that I was talking about beforehand, who's going to be the guy to make a play when it matters most. So I'm looking forward to seeing, watching him play. where I think that is also going to be really huge is that I said earlier that they might have one of the most talented like freshman classes in the country, and watching those guys continue to progress is going to be important. One of the biggest examples of that for me actually was when I was watching them when I've watched them play in person this year, both at the No Fear Invitational at Ohio and then also at VCU. Is even some of like their sophomore guys. So Hunter Freeman was arguably their best freshman last year, and he's still doing pretty solid this year. But his brother Jake Friedman, who was sort of a little bit more like in the shadow of him last year, has really stepped up a lot, and his progression from freshman to sophomore year and the leap that he's made has been something that was really noticeable for me as well. And so the biggest thing that I think is a strength for them is that they're still deep.
Very deep.
It's just, continuing to get that experience, continuing to make sure that you foster the talent that you do have. And I think that they will certainly be more than capable of doing that.
Yeah, they also got that championship pride about them as well.
Yeah.
And I know like they believe that this is not just a one-time thing. They want to win like multiple championships. I know they got the work ethic. They just need to get more exposure because other teams are gunning for them as well.
Yep. So next, Ohio University. So Ohio.
What a fun team to watch.
Yeah, so 12-0 right now. Sitting at number 3 in the Gonzalez standings, and one of the biggest things that really stands out for them, and you already addressed this, Shadid, was they play well. Like when they are playing like a team, they are playing really well, and they're not going to get beat. I talked beforehand about what a stud Jake Larson has been this year, and how you can pretty much just like put him in on like the All-American list already. Absolute cannon. And then one of the things that's like so wild to me about this team is that this was a team that during the 2015-16 season, when this was nationals at Bowling Green, so this was this was my sophomore year. I'm dating myself a little bit.
4 years ago.
So when it was that season, this Ohio University team was their very first time in the league, and they were 0-29.
Yeah.
And now they are 12-0. And so a lot of that has to do with the guys who have been around for 4 years, guys like Kyle Smart, for example, and Noah Arant, who have, stuck things through and really helped the team flourish to like where they are now. And that's been really impressive to see. And then some other guys who have been really impressive, Zach Howman has been really solid during the year. And so continuing to talk about their depth. I mean, you can go down the list of a lot of guys that on that team that is going to be able to like step up and make a play when it matters most. And they certainly have national championship potential written on them. I think that if you were to poll like the NCDA, the entirety of the NCDA right now, it's probably them and Grand Valley that are like on most people's mind that's like gonna be in the national championship.
Yep.
Now, it would be really, hopefully we'll get a chance to watch Grand Valley and Ohio play
at some point
to, determine like, all right, let's see where the quote unquote proverbial top two teams, at least in like most people's minds, stand. And that would be a really fun thing to watch. I think that right now the only weakness for them is, and this is what, this was something that I talked with Noah Arant about, was in the moments where they don't play like a team, where you have guys try and step up and make individual plays and they don't communicate and stuff. Yeah. They look like an entirely different group.
A completely different team. And it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, like, and I hate even saying this, they're beatable. Mm-hmm. And they like fall apart like quick. And it's not even like oh, this is going to happen very subtly. It's literally like you have like an anchor or a boulder over over a cliff, and it just falls. Like they have to play as a team. That's without question.
It happened. Yeah, now it happens so infrequently that
it's a non-issue for the most part.
Yeah. but making sure that they continue to play as a team. Another area where this is sort of like a high risk, high reward thing that I notice for them sometimes is they seem to be really willing to throw a lot of crosses. Now, again, it's a high risk, high reward type of strategy. You can catch people sleeping from time to time if you time things correctly, and that was something that they were able to do not in the No Fear tournament, but what I noticed, like when I got a chance to watch them play against VCU at West Virginia's Backwoods Brawl, was they were able to catch a lot of guys sleeping, and that was a really big thing.
Yep.
But conversely, if you try to implement that sort of stuff against a team that also works together, really vocal on the court, say a Grand Valley, for example, those types of throws can turn into catches really quickly and can make things fall apart. And so just got to be careful with that and make sure that, you continue to time things correctly, but, can't harp on too many negatives when you're 12-0. So
no.
It is what it is.
No, they're having their best season thus far.
Yeah, definitely. Next, JMU. Right now they're sitting at 5-2. I would say that for them, this is a weird JMU team. And I say weird because, Shadid, you and I have seen, like...
The JMU of the past?
The JMU of the past that's, like... Just, like, literal men just across the board. Like...
Grown men.
Like, 28 with a mortgage and probably 2 kids type of grown men.
The Doug Schillings of the world.
The Doug Schillings and Brent Gromers. That sort of deal. And
Jesus.
And this team, like this JMU team, they aren't that, but they are getting results that they need to get for the most part. And I think that the rest of the league is starting to catch up a little bit to them talent-wise, which is why they don't necessarily like stand out as much as they used to. But they still have guys who are, essentially carry a lot of swagger, and I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna win. I'm just gonna go win. I'm gonna go get that guy out right now.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely works to their strengths, because when they are, I see them as a team that's like, if they go into the game like knowing for sure that they're gonna win,
they'll crush them.
Then they're gonna crush it, or at least they're gonna come out on like the winning side. Where I see one of the biggest weaknesses for this team is that they tend to have a little bit of slow starts. And this can be a little bit dangerous for them, like in early morning games and that sort of deal. So, for example, against Bowling Green, that was their first game of the day. It was within the first queue as well, so that was like 9 in the morning type of deal. And if they don't come out with like the type of like JMU energy that's like peak JMU,
right?
The we're so much better than them energy.
So much better than them.
And the we're so much better than them energy. If they don't come out swinging with that, then they play a little bit uninspiring at times. But when they do get the engine revved up and get things going, and you see guys high-fiving and wooing and eyeing and everything like that, and have that we're so much better than you attitude, like I said earlier. I don't think that they're going to get beat by many teams.
Nah, one thing that's really going to help them out with the whole getting fired up and energy.
What's that?
I mean, and granted, we are the NCDA. We don't really, as much as people may think, we don't really endorse this. But headshots.
Yeah, that's fair.
They are a team, I will say this, and this is probably fair. They might be like, come on, Shadi. But if we're being honest, they are a team. They do get hype when they body somebody.
Yeah.
And they will let you know, like, yeah, I got you out, and you're not going to do that again, huh? It's like, no, we ain't going to do it again. It's like, yeah, JMU, go Dukes. That's how they are. But no. But one thing I really do like about this JMU team, I feel like for the first time, like ever, I think they have a strategy.
I think one of the other things is that they just they look more in control.
Yeah.
For the most part, like the thing about like the JMU teams of the past, so like we said, grown men like showing up on the court, and I think they were able to intimidate teams into making like stupid mistakes, and
I mean, when you got Doug Schilling like throwing like halfway across the court from his back line, and then just hearing just gunshots, why would you want to challenge him at point blank when he can just body you 50 feet away, and you're just like, this should be a catch. Why my chest is red? What's going on here? But no, I mean, like they don't have like that type of pure dominance, and I feel like Towson also like winning like the national championship also kind of made people look at JMU a little bit differently, but they still have their pride, they still have their swag, and I also feel like this is also a team that's also, finally making the adjustments of like, okay, we're going to play a little bit more discipline, we're going to play with a strategy, we always going to have great talent. Now let's use that talent and really just let people know what we're capable of doing.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so next, we'll try to speed up a little. We should probably try and speed up a little bit just so we can get through everybody in a somewhat timely manner, because otherwise we're gonna make people fall asleep. But anyways, so next on the list, Michigan State, and right now they're sitting at 3-4. Now Michigan State's played one of the toughest schedules in the country. I mean, they've played against Grand Valley State twice. They've played against Central Michigan twice. They played against Bowling Green. So now actually, I think like officially, right now they have like what I would say is they do have the toughest schedule in the country by, pure like Gonzalez rating.
Yeah.
Which, I think that, and I'm going to get into a moment why that's a little bit interesting, because one of the things that I noticed was in Michigan State's last tournament when they had the Spartan Invite, they played against Central Michigan and then Grand Valley, and in the Grand Valley game, they actually like put in a lot more of their younger players like early on, like the newer guys, and sort of sat some of the starters.
Right.
And I think it's an interesting thing, because I definitely do believe in the idea that iron sharpens iron, where if you are playing against another tough opponent, that's going to continue to help you improve your craft, and you're going to have to learn new things to adapt and get better and that sort of deal. And I certainly don't have a problem with that. With that being said, for a team that realistically should have not just Final Four or get to the national championship, but like realistically should have win nationals type of goal in mind.
Right.
They do need to get some of their more experienced players like those big game moments. And I'm not saying that they're, not going to say like throwing in the towel per se, but like if you are just just focused right now on getting, only, putting those younger guys in like those tough situations, then, you got to make sure that you also are getting like some of the other guys, in those some of your other more experienced players, continuing to put them in tough situations, because that keeps them more disciplined. It helps, keep them aware of, where they need to improve on in their game and that sort of deal. And so that's something that I would caution a little bit more. But they've got a lot of really talented pieces. Jacob Georges, I think, has been arguably Michigan State's best player thus far. Doing as both thrower and a catcher.
I would probably say Michigan State probably best player has probably been Ben Wakefield. I cannot say his last name. I'm sorry, Brent. I'm sorry, but Michigan State, Kevin Bailey, as well as Peyton Schuster Peyton have said repeatedly like we got like a really talented freshman class, and their rookie class has been phenomenal. I had the opportunity to see them play in September. The rookie class is a real deal. And so, yes, it was an interesting move when they played their rookies in that game against GV, but they play extremely well, and they was not intimidated. So I feel like they have a strategy that's going to work for them, try to build the bench and the depth of their core. So that way, when the more veteran players are playing with them, they would have like better chemistry, and that's going to make them a more difficult team. A lot of people do believe that they probably have one of the best talent on the team. And so we're now just looking at them like, okay, you making the progression, Elite 8, 2018, Final Four last year, 2019. We're now expecting like, okay, championship game. Like we need to see that progression. And they have the talent to do it. It's just now time for them to do it.
Yeah. No, that's definitely more than fair to say. And actually, I stand corrected. I'm pretty sure they played GV 3 times, so that's 3 of their losses, and then
that's tough.
Had 1 loss to Bowling Green, which was in overtime. Which, you play a tough team like Grand Valley again. Talking about iron sharpens iron. I think that'll help things out, but they also do need to get a little. They also, like JMU and Towson, probably should play a little bit more games than where they are right now. So they've only, both of those teams have only played 7 games, and if they can continue to play against more opponents and see some different things, I think that's something that will should help them out.
I'm pretty sure they go out to another tournament outside the Michigan Dodgeball Cup. I'm pretty sure they will, probably the War.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Yeah.
All right, next on our list, Miami. So Miami currently sits at number 6 in the Gonzalez standings, and they are 9-3 thus far. They have an arguable MVP candidate in Tom Morand, and then they have some other pieces in there that are really big. I talked about Reed Munger earlier. Kevin Karotis has been pretty solid for them, along with Dominic Tyberski, who's been pretty solid for them for a couple years now. They are a team that I think that, and this is a weird thing because I almost view it as a positive, but they're going to go as far as like Tom can carry them sort of deal.
Yeah.
And again, they do have really good pieces around them. It's just like
the team is built around him.
The team is built around him in the sense that like when he gets going and he essentially like revs the engine for them. I mean, everybody else feeds off of that charisma, and they are able to do things that even might be outside of like their normalcy, and continue and step up in that sort of deal. And so I think for them, that's one of their biggest strengths. Now, again, it's also one of those things that you got to be careful of because they seem to be a team that relies a ton on like momentum and that sort of deal. And that was one of the things that I would say that was kind of impressive in the Grand Valley game was that they were able to come back and that to at least force it into overtime, which was big. But making sure that you continue to do that, day in, day out, and essentially stomp on, like in my opinion, like continue to stomp on opponents that you are better than is going to be big for them. And at 9-3, you can't be upset with where you are right now. So
no,
they'll continue to do really well. Next on our list, Central Michigan. Central Michigan comes in at number 7, and they are 5-6 right now. So we mentioned that it was a little bit of a rough November for them. So they had the No Fear Invitational where they went 1-2, but they also played at the Spartan Invite, and they lost to Grand Valley and Michigan State.
Yeah.
Now, again, caveat, 2 really great opponents. The downside of that being, if you want to be the Central Michigan that Central Michigan is supposed to be, you got to start winning those games.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. Now,
it's a lot. I mean, because this is a team that went to 4 consecutive championship games and made it to the Final Four.
And was 1 overtime period away from making it to the national championship last year.
Yeah. But another thing we also want to mention, too, like I believe like Eric Nelson is not going to be playing the spring semester. if I remember correctly.
I think he's like doing like a study abroad, or actually, I think what he's doing is he's going to be away from campus, but I think he's going to be trying to play as well, because I think he's going to be doing school at like a satellite or something to that effect. But
okay,
but yeah, it will be something interesting to see. I think that as far as like some of their more notable games, so they had a 3-2 win earlier in the year against Bowling Green. They beat Saginaw Valley 4-0. They beat Kentucky 4-2. So the biggest thing is, trying to find ways to win against teams like Michigan State and Grand Valley. And I think that a lot of that has to do with just making sure that guys are showing up and continuing to get better because, as we pointed out for the No Fear Invitational, you had literally 25% of the team leave after one of the games. And, I get it. Life happens and whatnot. But,
yeah,
I think that this team has more talent than what it's displayed thus far.
Yeah.
And, continue to try and get like everybody out there. I mean, this was a group that had a CMU B team at the start of the year.
I know.
And then for whatever reason, they only, stuff happens, I guess, like people get sick or, other, family obligations come up and whatever the case. And, that's understandable, but you got to make sure that you get the full commitment because, as the proverbial saying goes, like your team is only as strong as your weakest link. And in this case, the weakest link isn't it's not the guys who are there on the court. It's the guys who aren't there and essentially like holding the team back and preventing them from continuing to improve. So,
yeah, some of the alumni members like Casey, being a coach or not technically being a coach has been working with them. And, he's been telling me like just some of the struggles that they're going through. This is a young team, but, you still got players like, Kyle the Gun Garner and Jerry Brown, still on there. And, those are two players that play with a lot of passion. So I know they're going to turn things around, but they definitely have the work cut out for them because, Michigan State and Grand Valley, they're only going to get better as well as other teams in the league.
Mm-hmm, definitely. All right, it's going down. Next, Bowling Green State. Bowling Green State's an interesting one because they're a bit of a roller coaster. They've had a bit of a roller coaster season, I should say. So they started off the year with a really big win against Michigan State, and I think that sort of set an expectation for them that this was going to be a team that was going to be elite and not fall off with the loss of Max Kowalski and Reed Munger.
Right.
But immediately following that, quite literally 1 week later when they played at Ohio State, they lost to Ohio State 6-2. They lost to Ohio University 5-0. They lost to Miami, and so they lost 3 straight there, and certainly wasn't entirely the best showing. And then the following weekend, or not the following weekend, but the following tournament after that, where they played at Pink Out, they got a win against Kent State. They had to go to overtime to beat Cleveland State, ultimately got the win. And then they forced an overtime game against Miami and unfortunately lost that. But getting to overtime against a talented team like that is certainly, nothing to hold your head about. And then, to wrap it up with not to wrap it up because they got one more tournament in between, but then going to back to Miami for the Red Hawk invite.
Right.
They beat Saginaw. And then they lost to Central Michigan 3-2, and then they had a 5-4 overtime game against Cincinnati, who, Cincinnati's a younger team. This is probably somebody that Bowling Green needs to, have a little bit more of a, foot on their neck sort of deal.
Right.
And then all that just to then, for the No Fear Invitational, they lose a tough one to JMU. JMU's a really talented team, but then they, slaughter North Georgia winning 5-0, and then also Cincinnati and win that game 5-1. And so there's been these like up and down moments for this team in terms of results, and it's an interesting thing because you can see like essentially that the ceiling is pretty high for these guys, but you also get the feeling that the floor is kind of low at times.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're going to have to do to be able to like overcome that, but they'll have to think of something, because when you have that sort of inconsistency, you got to figure out which team is going to show up on nationals.
Yeah.
And while Bowling Green is, realistically a little bit more on the outside looking in as far as like national championship contention or anything like that, I do expect that they want to go far, and not just like Elite Eight, but even like Final Four sort of deal. So, making sure that they continue to say like only one Bowling Green is going to show up, and it's going to be the best Bowling Green.
Right.
Is going to be really important.
Right. I mean, because when they're on, they're on. But when they're not, it's night and day for them.
Yeah. Next on our list, number 9, VCU. Right now they are 6-2. One of the things that was really pleasant to see for them is they got a really huge program win over JMU. And they look like a different team than what we saw at the start of the year.
Yeah.
And I know that's a lot to say just for one 2-game tournament, but they were able to get an overtime win against JMU, and then they did really well against UVA and won 5-1. And they're playing with a little bit more consistency and more strategy, it felt like, in the last tournament, and they made adjustments based off of some of the stuff that they saw earlier in the year, and that was really interesting to see. And now the question is, like, all right, you were able to pull off a good tournament. Are you going to be able to continue to do that for the rest of the year?
Yeah, that's always been like the knock against VCU is we see what you guys have done in nationals. We want you to do that in the regular season.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And I mean, at 6-2, it's hard to say much about that now. I will say, just based off of the way that things have shaken up, a lot of those wins have been what some might consider to be like lower tier wins. Not to be mean to most of our teams, but outside of the JMU game, 2 of them came against West Virginia, 2 of them came against UVA, who are on the lower end of the standings. They got a win against Maryland, and they won that one pretty early on in the season. I think it was either 4-2 or 3-2, something to that effect.
It was 4-2.
4-2.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was if I remember right, I think it was also like 4-1, and Maryland scored with like 30 seconds just to tighten it a little bit. But so they got a couple decent wins, like within with JMU and Maryland there, but they had a chance to get an upset win against Ohio, and while they had a decent first half, they fell apart in the second half and lost that one. They ended up dropping one to Maryland as well, and so again, like, those were a little bit the earlier tournaments, and then we saw them change it around and focus a little bit more with like a strategy for their home tournament. Now it's just a matter of continuing to try and go out there and play more often. And I've talked to their captain a lot, Ike Fleckenstein, and he has a lot of hopes for them, like trying to travel and go participate in a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think that win over JMU kind of like helps them sort of like see the light a little bit. That's like, oh, like we are actually pretty good, or like we should be pretty good.
Yeah.
So, hopefully they're able to build off on that and, continue to go further.
Yeah, they should travel more.
Yeah, definitely. Next, Ohio State, rounding out our top 10. Ohio State right now sitting at 7-2, and they've been a very, very pleasant surprise to start the year. Ohio State was a team that last year sort of struggled to find their footing at times, and I think they ended up either as like the 15 or the 16 seed. 16 seed sounds right.
Yeah.
At nationals, which for Ohio State, they've seen better. They've seen better from their program before.
Yeah.
Now it looks like they're starting to move back towards in that direction of being, being an elite team, and part of that has to do with just the fact that the leadership that's been displayed by Ben Johnson and Dylan Greer, and those guys has been like really tremendous. So not only were they able to utilize their own talents and display their dodgeball prowess, but they are continuing to develop as leaders, and they're able to help improve on the skills of guys like an Evan Lukart or Ryan Ginsberg that we talked about beforehand, and continuing to help push those guys further in their dodgeball development. And so that's been something that's been really pleasant to watch. I would say for them, they sort of have a similar-ish type of thing going on as like VCU, where it's like if you break down like their overall games, there are some, they're definitely like more often in the win column than not. Like we said, they're 7-2, but the two losses that they have, so they lost to Grand Valley in the 5-1 game that I mentioned earlier, where they had a tight first half, but unfortunately couldn't keep it together for the second half.
Right.
Their other loss was to Miami, which was a 3-2 overtime game, and where that sort of like makes me wonder is like if they're proverbially like punching up on an opponent, like are they in prime enough position? Like, do they have the full talent from 1 to 12 to be able to take on some of those guys and hold out against tougher opponents? And for a team, like I said, that's been like a really pleasant surprise, those types of games are going to be really crucial. Now they did get some good wins. Like they got a big win against Bowling Green State.
Yep.
And they got a impressive like 5-1 win as well against University of Cincinnati. But again, it's just a matter of like, and I feel like a broken record when I when I keep saying this, but it's like make that breakthrough to beat like a Miami, because right now where I see Ohio State is, it feels like their ceiling right now is to be the third best team in Ohio, which would be after Ohio University and Miami. That's like their ceiling right now, and I think that their floor realistically is probably like fifth best team in Ohio. So the only other teams that I think that have a chance of surpassing them in that regard would be Bowling Green State, and then maybe a Cleveland State or Cincinnati if Cincinnati makes a really big breakthrough.
Right.
But or I guess, see, that's the other thing. The Ohio region is pretty interesting right now. It's pretty muddled within the middle. Like there's it's sort of like how the East Coast used to be for a while, where JMU and Towson were the clear like 1-2, and then everybody else was sort of fighting for a scrap sort of deal.
Yep.
And right now, the Ohio region is sort of like within that same phase right now, where you kind of having teams beat up on each other. So now, again, Ohio State's getting the win column more often than not. It would just be really cool to see them, like I said, make that breakthrough and say, like, we're not going to settle for being the third best team in Ohio. We're the Ohio State University.
The Ohio State University.
Yeah. That being said, like I said earlier, I like what I see from the captains in Dylan Greer and Ben Johnson, and we'll continue to see some of those younger players develop. So that'll be fun. Next, University of Maryland. University of Maryland right now sitting at 4-4, and they've got some pretty good upper talent on their squad. So Zach Fernald, Sean Sullivan, and I'm sorry, James, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, but Klimkowitz, something along that line.
That's a tongue twister right there.
A little bit of a tongue twister, but those guys have been really impressive for me thus far. Zach Fernald played over the summer in Elite Dodgeball and got a chance to get some really good experience there, and I think that's paying off for him. It looks like that he's improved as a catcher a little bit from where he was a year ago. He still has a really great arm, and he's continuing to utilize that really well. And I think that Sean Sullivan has been a solid leader for them as well. and the team responds well to his positive energy that he brings to the court. I mean, he's a guy who's he's a guy who for the most part is like always smiling. And it was like an upbeat attitude, and I think that the team responds really well to that.
It's very contagious.
Yeah, and then some other guys another guy that I've seen that's done pretty well as well. Zach's younger brother, Daniel Fernald.
Oh yeah,
has stepped up and made some pretty big plays in their win against VCU. He looked pretty solid, and against Ohio University, he made some catches against guys like Josh Bornecki and even Jake Larson.
Yeah,
that were really impressive, and so he's continuing to develop and be a solid player, and so that's been really fun to see. I think that right now, where Maryland is a little bit limited, is that their firepower isn't entirely there. They've got some good arms, like I mentioned, with the guys like Zach, Sean, and James. They also have guy Max, who has a pretty solid arm, but it's not they're not like earth shattering in that regard. And so where I think that they need to continue to improve is they need to try and focus more on getting kills within like the neutral zone instead of trying to wait to go to like a team's like an attack line. Because like I said, the arms are decent, but they're not
overpowering.
They're not overpowering. And so trying to get in more like close quarter kills is going to be something that I think that they need to focus on. But right now, I think that they're realistically kind of locked in at like. Right now they're like 11. I think that they're locked in anywhere between like 11 through like 8 essentially, and so they have that potential to be able to do that.
Yeah, they're kind of dealing with a unfortunate travel restriction, which means that if a tournament is more than 300 miles, then they are not able to go. So a lot of their tournaments essentially around the East Coast. So they would have some opportunities, to make some noise, and rightfully so. At least within 2 tournaments during the spring semester before they go to nationals. But they're also a team that you don't really want to play at nationals because I think since 2017, I think they're 9-0 on day one. I don't think they lost a day one game within that time period, if I remember correctly.
Wild stuff.
Yeah.
All right, next on our list, Wisconsin-Platteville. So Wisconsin-Platteville right now is sitting at 6-2, and they have done really well within their own region. So they've definitely taken care of business against teams like Nebraska, Depaul, SIUe, Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Right. But one of the things that was pretty alarming to see was their
two losses.
Was their 2 losses. So their 2 losses were to Michigan State and Grand Valley State, and those games were 7-0 and 10-0 respectively. Now, from what I understand, they also traveled pretty light for those events, and light meaning I think that they had less than a full roster.
Right.
Now, with that being said, for a team that needs to try and crack in this top 16 and stay within the top 16 like they want to, they're gonna need to continue to get more games against. They're gonna need to continue to get more games against those elite opponents, but also like compete with them. And, they're kind of in a weird, they're in, geography situation as well, where it's kind of weird for them and it can be tough to travel at times. But, we talked about beforehand on Michigan State, one of their biggest strengths is that they're playing against really tough opponents.
Yep.
And, not to try and discredit too many teams, but realistically, the Midway Conference hasn't historically been as strong. And so it would be nice to see, and not just Wisconsin-Platteville travel, but other teams travel to Wisconsin, like say some of the Ohio teams like Ohio University or Miami,
right,
or Ohio State as an example. It would be nice to see those teams travel or see an opportunity for them to compete against more of those teams, and I think that'll give us a much better indication of where they are as a team versus essentially playing polar opposites where they're either playing Grand Valley or they're playing and like I said, DePaul. So It is what it is.
That's definitely night and day right there.
All right. Next, Saginaw Valley State. And Saginaw Valley right now, they're in a pretty tough spot. So they're 2-7. Definitely not what we're used to seeing out of the Cardinals from a historic perspective. And I think that, like, right now, it's just a weird issue of, like, right now, at least from the moments I've saw, there's people that are on the court, and it doesn't feel like that they entirely always know, like, where they need to be at all times. Historically, Saginaw has had some, like, pretty, like, hard-nosed leaders who, can be very direct and tell you, like, what you're doing wrong and where you need to be and that sort of deal.
Right.
And I didn't quite see a ton of that in their appearance at the No Fear Invitational. And so, maybe they need to go back a little bit to the drawing board, and not just the drawing board, but essentially hit the boot camp and say, like, all right, guys, like, let's tighten things up a little bit here and there. One of the things that I didn't see a ton of, it doesn't seem like they make or at least at the No Fear Invitational, because that's the only time I've been able to watch them play in person. But at the No Fear Invitational, they didn't make a ton of catches, and catches can be a really big momentum building thing for any team. And so their inability to do so there, I think, is really harmful for their for their overall potential.
Yeah, I saw them at Michigan and also at the Ohio tournament. It's just no nice way of saying they're currently in rebuilding mode right now, but they still in the 14th spot, which means that if they can just get a win against, like, one of the Michigan schools this year, that will really help them out a lot, give them a lot of confidence, and still keep them within the top 16.
Mm-hmm. Next on the list, Penn State. Penn State's always an interesting one because you never really – they're always a bit of an enigma that we don't always see them get a chance to play a ton. They've had some pretty interesting results, I'd say. I would say that their biggest win on the season thus far was against Akron, which was a 4-3 overtime win at the University of Akron. They also got wins against Cleveland State and Kent State, and it's kind of another really wild result for them was they played against Ohio University, and they came very close to beating Ohio. They lost to them 3-2 in overtime, and I just don't know what to make of the team because, like I said, they had that really close game against Ohio, but then they also lost 4-1 to Kent State at one point. And so, this is more of a side effect of me. Just like I said, like I haven't had a ton of opportunities to see them, just like some clips like here and there. But they, are another team where we can talk a lot about like continuing to try and expand your horizons and play more often and that sort of deal.
Yeah.
And it would be nice if they had, were able to come to any of the East Coast tournaments now. A school like them, they're really big into their college football, and so
nothing wrong with that.
They're not gonna miss any home football games and whatnot. So spring semester, hopefully we'll see them, kind of break out of their shell a little bit. But they still have some guys on the roster who are really talented. They've got guys like Jared Baker, Brett Miller, who's been a really big staple for them for a couple years. Adam Cook, Trevor Schofield. So like, there are recognizable names on that roster. We just want to, continue to see them flourish and continue to, expand, because right now they're sitting at number 14 in the standings, and so if they want to make sure that they continue to stay within the top 16, play games against opponents like within your skill level. So like play against guys like Maryland and VCU and that sort of deal that
right.
that are close to you.
Right.
And then we'll get again, kind of like Wisconsin Platteville, we'll get a better idea of who they are as a team.
Yeah, I think the thing about Penn State is like they're not even like 3 hours away from Towson, and I know that Towson is hosting the tournament in February, so it would be very nice for them to come out, see them play and whatnot. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go to the War in March.
Yeah.
So more opportunities for them.
All right. At number 15, we've got Akron, who is sitting at 8-7. One of the things that I love with Akron is that they definitely take advantage of their geography and play as many games as they can. 15 games, I think, is only second to Bowling Green. Maybe they may have more, or they're tied, actually. Both of them have played 15 games. So,
oh, wow.
But, taking advantage of their geography and making sure that they get as many games in as possible, I think has been really nice. And they've got some interesting results. So, they beat, to start the year, they had a little bit of a kind of a growing pain showing. We mentioned earlier how they lost some really big names from last season, and so in their first tournament they went 1-2. They got a win against Cincinnati, but lost to Ohio State and Cleveland State. Then, as the year has progressed a little bit, they've started to solidify their identity a little bit more, and have kind of like made some gradual improvements now. They still have some moments where they just kind of don't show up. I think that the most notable example of that was their 3-0 loss to Kent State at the Summit Street Slugfest, and also they went into overtime against Cleveland State, who was kind of struggling, who was a little bit like offbeat that tournament as well. And so Akron's sort of in a similar situation with like Bowling Green, where it's like, you're still like a bit of a young team, and so you're gonna make mistakes here and there, but rely a little bit on some of your like alumni experience, because I think that Akron's network has grown a little bit bigger, like with the players that have come through that program. And so
right.
I think if they utilize a little bit of that experience from, some of the guys who have already graduated, that'll continue to help toughen them up. Now, obviously as well, playing 15 games is going to toughen you up too. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths for them thus far.
Yeah.
They have they have a really solid captain in Jacob Weber. They've also gotten good mileage out of Clayton Eggleston as well. It's just continuing to, get more consistent results, because I feel confident that Akron, should be probably a little bit higher on this list. And I think that for them, based off of what I've seen, I think that their ceiling is probably within like the top 12.
Yeah.
Now it's just a matter of making sure that you don't have stinkers like that 3-0 loss to Kent State, or beating opponents, beating opponents more thoroughly, like Cleveland State, who I think that they match up a little bit better than.
Yeah.
Fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Next, number 16, North Georgia. Right now they're 3-2. The only two tournaments that they played in, they had a doubleheader against Georgia Southern, and then they had the No Fear Invitational. So North Georgia, I think the cat is not out of the bag yet as far as like what where this team will like ultimately sit. I think for them being like right on the cusp, where we're gonna have like a lot of interesting insight on them is when we get to that aforementioned like Southern Dodgeball Cup,
right,
where we get a chance to see more of the South teams all come together. So that'll include Kentucky, Georgia Southern, as well as NSULA as well, which would be really nice for them.
Yeah.
And then I think that VCU is planning on making a trip down there as well.
Oh, wow.
Which would be a good opportunity for both teams to be able to, continue to improve.
Yeah.
And so those types of things will be interesting. And we'll talk a little bit more about like our top 16 projections right now. But right now, North Georgia is sitting right there at that number 16 spot. So that's going to be, they're essentially on the hot seat. Metaphorically speaking. 17 right now, Western Michigan. They only played one game, which was against Grand Valley, and it was a bit of a blowout, unfortunately. But Peterborough continuing to do what he can to try and, keep things afloat with a really young program there.
Yeah, it's kind of hard, trying to run a dodgeball team when you're going for your doctorate degree. So,
yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
Cleveland State sitting at number 18, and they are 6-7 right now, and they are similar to what I was saying earlier about Miami, where they'll go as far as their most talented player will take them, which is Joe Walsh. Now, I think that the difference between Miami and Cleveland State is that Miami's, essentially like 12th man up is better at this point than Cleveland State's 12th man up. And, not to say that, not to get, too negative with Cleveland State, but their depth is not really there. So if Joe Walsh has a bad game, or if a team decides to target him early on and, take him out, they've got to, Leon Rockamore can step up and make some plays here and there, but not to the same extent that Joe can.
Right.
And so we're going to need to see a little bit more of an improvement from like that bottom end. And I think that by virtue of them being like within the Ohio region, and we talked earlier about how those teams tend to beat up on each other, or have been right now.
Yep.
They will continue to like try and make strides. They're another team that I think that lacks a little bit of a strategy focus. I know that Eric Boehm is coaching them right now, and he's able to do a lot of great things for them, but they know situationally what they're supposed to do. They don't have like a predestined plan to like force teams into that situation, if that makes sense. So, as an example, Towson's team from last season, one of the things that they would do, or I guess a better example I can think of, is Bowling Green's team from 2018. One of the things that they knew was they had a team that had a ton of catchers.
Yep.
And so what they would do is they would do a lot of quick resets, but do quick resets with the purpose of getting back quickly and forcing teams to essentially make these long reset throws, or try and make throws while they're backpedaling essentially, and force teams into making, silly mistakes that can turn into easy catches. And so for a Cleveland State team, making sure that you have a strategy where you can essentially funnel players towards Joe Walsh and allow him to make plays to pick people off, I think would be something that would be really beneficial for them. Now, obviously when you become a bigger player, you get a bigger target on your back, but we'll see. You will see what they get a chance to do.
Yeah.
Next, University of Kentucky. So right now, UK is 2-4, and like I said, I've had a little bit less exposure to them than I have for some of the other teams that are on this list, and
same.
I think that in the moments that I did see with Kentucky, they have the ability to pick off teams that don't entirely take them seriously, or are having an off day. I think that the biggest example of that was their win over Saginaw Valley State at the No Fear Invitational, but they are also like sort of in that position where I think that realistically, like they're a lot more geographically advantaged than some of the other Southern teams. And so for them to only have appearances at 2 events, I think is a little bit disappointing, because I think that they are a group that they look like they have some pretty good athletes out there. And so, putting yourselves in more opportunities to continue to improve is something that would be good to see. And then some of the more like tactical things that I talked about beforehand, like making sure that you follow up on like team throws and actually commit to it. And, that'll come with the experience sort of piece. But, like I said, I think that there's a lot more potential there. One of the biggest indicators of that for me was when they played at Michigan State's tournament, like really early in the year. And, they, were in a tight one with Central Michigan. And they were in tight ones with both Saginaw Valley and Central Michigan, and then they were able to get revenge on Saginaw Valley State. Now it's just a matter of, when you had, first taste of blood, you were, able to, hang right there with the big boys. But then you took a really big amount of time off. After playing in September, you didn't play again until, halfway through November. And so as a result, skills start to diminish a little bit because you don't get as many opportunities. And so that's when you run into a situation where you then play a team who's really hungry, like a Cincinnati or a Cleveland State.
Right.
And then unfortunately, like, you fall 5-2, 5-1, that sort of deal. So, that's kind of the criticism. And I know that, for a lot of these guys, I'm kind of, broken record in saying, play games. But, that's
really what you have to do.
It is what you have to do. And also it gives you a better idea. It will then also give you a better idea. All right, well, what are, like, the more specific things that we can work on? So I talked beforehand about, like, Grand Valley, for example. Like, we've seen them play enough that it's like, oh, wall ball is an area that they still, like, need to be able to be better at defensively. Or, another example, like a Miami or a Cleveland State, where it's like, that you need to be able to funnel plays towards, like, your best player. You learn those types of things versus we just need to get the flat out experience. So,
right.
That's an important point to drive home. All right, Cincinnati, number 20 on our list, and they're sitting at 6-6 right now. Cincinnati is a team that I think that I know that one of their big goals was being able to make sure that they could crack into the top 16 and try and make nationals. Now, they
got a chance.
It's just a matter of, again, I think that stamina piece is really big, because if they're going to, falter in the third game of the day, how is that really, that makes you a little bit concerned for, nationals, because realistically they're probably going to be a team that needs to get, at least 2 wins, maybe even 3 wins, at day one at nationals in order to make it to that top 16 bracket. And so,
yeah.
If they are falling off in, like, the last game of the day, so, like, a clear example of that was the, Central Michigan game, but also the first tournament of the year. Their third game, they played against Ohio State, and they lost that 5-1. Their third game at the Pink Out, they lost that to Akron 5-2.
Oof.
Their third game against Miami, at the University of Miami, against BGSU, they lost that 5-4 in overtime.
Oof.
And so it's a matter. This seems to be a trend for them, where it's like that last game of the day just seems to be a little bit of a struggle for them. And I don't know if that's a side effect of they're pushing themselves in the red, really early and playing really fast pace.
Right.
And so they just don't have anything left in the tank at that point, or if they just need to get a more they just need to find, like, that mental leader that's, like, locks everything up for them, like, in those later games, and stay mentally tough. But, that's a trend that that we're seeing from them, and we need to see them break out of that trend.
Yeah. I mean, we're asking a lot for a second-year team, but if they're going to make themselves, be more competitive, these are the things they have to do.
Yeah. All right. Next on our list, Nebraska. Again, another team that, unfortunately, I wish I could say that I could talk more about. They had a tight result against University of Wisconsin-Platteville at the Pioneer Invite. It was a 3-2 overtime loss for them, but it shows, a 2-1 overtime loss to Wisconsin-Platteville. But it shows that they're continuing to make strides as a program, and they're not just, they're not being treated as, like, a doormat by, Wisconsin-Platteville.
Right.
Again, another team that, unfortunately, a little bit geographically challenged, and I wish I could get more, as president, I wish I could get more opportunities, and we're going to continue to try and do that. It'd be nice if we got some more teams to travel to them. They have a really fantastic facility.
Yeah.
They actually play at their, Division I basketball arena on the regular.
Oh, wow.
So that's, like, in our case, VCU, like,
the
National Siegel Center, like, every single time, which, is pretty impressive. But, it'd be nice if, like I said, more teams got a chance to go out there and experience that.
Yeah.
Next, 22nd, UVA. UVA right now 1-7, and their only win against Ball State. And again, I talked beforehand, like they, I feel like their team is better than what their record shows, but they have a problem with being able to overcome some of those close games. And not only that, but they're, outside of what I would say is like their top five, it feels like their talent falls off pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately you're not going to win. You're not going to win a lot of dodgeball games with a top five, with top five. Now, if they continue to play games, 8 games is a decent clip for the start of the year. If they continue to play games, maybe we'll start to see a little bit more development with some of those other guys. But the other thing is, making sure that they're getting more consistent faces out to tournaments and that sort of deal.
Yeah.
So one of the things that stood out to me, so I mentioned at the No Fear Invitational, they were missing Jake Corman, who's, I would say, arguably like their second best player, or at least second most talented player. He has to miss it for, his like other personal reasons, but there were also a bunch of other guys who I looked at and I was like, I'm pretty sure these are their first ever tournaments. And so, you can't really have that if you're a team that's, wants to be able to like make a push and make it to nationals and that sort of deal. So a little bit unfortunate there. Excuse me, 23rd, Marietta College. They have yet to play a game this year, but we're looking forward to when they do.
Yep.
24th, SIUe. Right now they're sitting at 1-5. The one win coming against Depaul, but from what I hear, they've got they're a younger program as well, and from what I hear, they've got some pretty good pieces around them. Zach Jung and Josh Dale in particular had really strong performances at the Pioneer Invite, and so if we continue to get more games for them and get more teams available for them, hopefully we'll continue to see them flourish like into future years. Right now at 25, West Virginia sitting at 2-7. West Virginia is an interesting one because I talked beforehand about how we felt like there was a lot to be desired at the No Fear Invitational, but they've got an All-American caliber player in Corey Naziadka. And they've also got, pieces around him that can be there to support him, like Isaac Avery, as well as assistant captain Drew Myers. So continuing to sort of like keep that message going that we were talking about beforehand, with finding a strategy and continuing to work there. West Virginia a little bit less so than Cleveland State. With Cleveland State, we were saying that Cleveland State seems to be a little bit more well-positioned, like situationally, whereas West Virginia, at times, they can get a little bit trigger happy, and a little bit fast-paced, which I think can, do them in at times. But, continuing to refine the strategy, I think, is a really big thing. And this is a team that I think could, with a couple tweaks, not just 2-7, but they could have potentially been looking at a team that's like, maybe 4-5 at this point right now, and a little bit higher in the standings. But hopefully we continue to see them make improvements. Next on the list, Kent State. Right now they're 3-13, and kind of the unfortunate thing with like Kent State that is just that they've been having like commitment issues as well. Now, Kent has historically been like a really committed and focused group when it comes to, the craft of dodgeball. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a strange thing to kind of hear that coming out of, their organization at this point in time. But, that's probably, that plays a lot into like where they are right now. They've gotten some good, wins thus far this year. I think probably their most notable one was getting a win against Akron. They also got a win against Penn State earlier this year, and so like there are opportunities there, and they have pieces. A guy like Easton Figueroa. I can't even I can't talk right now. It's like 2 in the morning now.
2 in the morning, but yeah, we're still going strong.
Yeah. Or a Tyler Miracle or a Riley Plyler, who are guys who are like, I think that can hang with the best of them. It's just a matter of, continuing to make sure that everybody else just shows up, not only just to games, but to practice as well, and, continue to improve on each other's skills.
Right.
Next, Ball State. Ball State right now 2-4, and they're a team that they do decently well within their own region. Unfortunately, Midway tends to be a little bit on the lower end. They're definitely their most notable result of the season. They were able to sneak a win against Cleveland State at the Pink Out.
Ooh, that was good.
Win that 4-2.
Wow.
Their other win was against Ohio's B team, which I think that's a win that should be expected. But
yeah.
I haven't again, and I feel bad for having to say this for a couple teams. I just haven't seen enough from them. But I think that unfortunately, Ball State just does lack a little bit of talent, compared to a lot of the other respective teams. And, unfortunately, if you're going to overcome that, you're going to need to, play a really sound strategy. And they're a younger team, so they don't necessarily, have experienced veterans or alumni to be able to build off of and learn from that. But as they continue to develop, hopefully they, sort of lock things down in that regard. I know that Jacob Lesky he's currently doing grad school at Ball State, and he's talked about trying to, make it out, and, maybe he can provide some of that veteran presence for them, but, only time will tell in that regard.
Right.
Next, Northwestern State University of Louisiana. They have yet to play a game this year. Looking forward to that. Depaul, it was nice to see them get 3 games in. Unfortunately, on the losing end of all 3, but for a program that is, built around, having fun with the sport of dodgeball, it sounded like that they had a good time at the Pioneer Invite, regardless of the results. So good to see them in that regard.
Yeah.
And then rounding out the list, Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern's a team who I think that, I think that the geographical disadvantages unfortunately hurt them, where they don't get all the opportunities to be able to play as many teams as they, want to.
Right.
This is a team that, having talked to a guy like Zach Rivera, who's, heavily involved with the team, even as an alumni, these are guys that want to play a lot of dodgeball. It's just that,
they just can't.
Yeah, just not having the opportunities. So, it's unfortunate when you have, guys like Sam Copland and Josh Manning who are, certainly, capable dodgeball players, and they're, essentially uncut gems. But, if you don't have a chance to, get refined and forge your skills a little bit more, you kind of, like I said, you tend to fall a little bit. So it's unfortunate in that regard.
Yeah.
So rounding out our discussion, and I know we've gone a little bit deep, but time-wise, but rounding out our discussion, we were going to talk a little bit about where we think some of our top 16 teams are. So for me, I think that there's essentially 11 locks, and I think Shadid kind of feels the same way. I think that Grand Valley, Towson, Ohio, JMU, Michigan State, Miami, Central, Bowling Green, VCU, Ohio State, Maryland are all locks in my opinion.
With a pen.
Yeah, with a pen. I think those are for different reasons. I think all those teams are more or less guaranteed. Within the top 10 of that. So from Grand Valley to Ohio State, I mean, those are all teams that, have demonstrated during this season that they are, the best of the best and will continue to be the best of the best. Maryland, number 11 team, a little bit more on the outside, but where they are on the East Coast, they're solidly able to get wins against teams like West Virginia and UVA. And so I think that because they're going to end up playing those teams a lot more frequently, they're going to continue to probably stay within that, like I said, that 11 to 9 range. So they'll be fine there. As far as my as far as like getting into my bubble teams, so on my bubble, I've got Saginaw Valley, Wisconsin-Platteville, Akron, Cincinnati, and Penn State. So that rounds out my top 16. Now, Saginaw, I think, is a little bit more of a safer bubble than the rest. And the reason that I say that is because right now their record is reflective of playing, Michigan teams, and it is what it is in that regard. They had a little bit of a stinker tournament at No Fear Invitational. It is what it is. Those things can happen from some time, but I think that realistically, like if that is the floor for them right now, it's kind of more of it only goes up from here for them. And they've got some talented guys. We talked about Joe Barber, and they've also got guys like Bryce Stevens as well, Josh Frick, who I think that just based off of some of that talent alone, they're not going to slip. They're not going to slip much further than where they are right now at number 12.
No, they're not.
Wisconsin-Platteville, just to touch on them a little bit, I think Platteville's biggest thing, like they dominate really well within their region, and I think because of that, that's going to continue to propel them and keep them within the top 16. The problem is, like, we have yet to see them play against a team that's like more within their skill range, and so they've played like the polar ends of the spectrum. They've played Grand Valley and Michigan State, and then they've played DePaul sort of deal. They had a talking about team within their skill range. So Nebraska, for example, they had a 2-1 overtime game. So it's going to be interesting to see if they get an opportunity to play against, say, a Ohio State or a BGSU, for example, what they'll be able to do in that type of situation. And the thing is, like, those games are going to come a little bit less frequently than some of the opponents within the Midway Conference. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
As far as the other ones, Akron, Cincinnati, and Penn State, I think Akron and Cincinnati, well, Akron more specifically, Akron right now, I believe is sitting at, I believe they're sitting at 15 right now. But they, they're sitting at 15. They get enough wins to be able to like put themselves in the bubble because they're very solidly within the middle of the Ohio region.
Right.
I think that their ceiling right now is probably like the fourth best team in Ohio. So the three teams that I have ahead of them pretty firmly at this point would be Ohio State, Ohio University, and Miami.
Yep.
University of Miami at Ohio.
Yep.
I think those three teams are pretty locked ahead of them, but I think that Akron has potential to be that fourth team with Bowling Green because we've seen them be able to pick them apart from time to time. So it's certainly there, but they're definitely like that bubble team because they also are susceptible to losing games like Kent State, and so you just can't
lose that. You can't lose those type of games.
Yeah. Cincinnati, I have them as like one of my last four in, and they're gonna have to punch a little. They're gonna have to continue to like punch a little bit upward. The biggest thing that I think that's going for them is that they are a young and hungry team, and they only have up to go essentially, and so. When you have a team that's essentially playing with like nothing to lose in that regard, like that's a little bit of a scary thing versus a team like say an Akron where they're sitting at 15 right now where they might not be taking a ton of risks because they don't want to, fall below that threshold.
Exactly.
But for a team like Cincinnati that, like I said, they are essentially going to have to claw and fight their way up to the top. Like I think that demeanor is going to help them out a little bit more. Plus they, still have the talented pieces to build up on. And they have a great coach in Wes Peters as well.
Yeah.
And then lastly, Penn State at my 16th spot. I think for them, the biggest thing is just like their results are so like mixed for me right now. And right now, where were they sitting? They're at like 14 right now. Their results are so mixed for me at the moment that it's hard for me to give a ton of reasons for why they should be there. It's also hard for me to give a ton of reasons for why they shouldn't be there. And so just based off of some of the guys that I know, like from name value. So guys like Brett Miller, as an example, like I know what they have there, and this is a team that even if they are like the 15th or 16th seed, they can give some teams trouble. So they just got to put together a couple wins here and there, and I think that they'll be locked in there. As far as some of the guys that I think are going to be on the outside looking in, I have right now North Georgia, Cleveland State, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And the reason that I have those guys on the outside looking in, North Georgia, I think the biggest issue is, again, kind of like the geographic stuff. So not having all the opportunities to play against new teams is certainly a little bit of an issue. Cleveland State, I think, suffers from essentially like the overload of abundance of talent right now within the Ohio region. And so I think that unfortunately they're going to see themselves a little bit more on the loss column against the Ohio teams, because right now against other Ohio programs, they're sitting at 3-5 on the year.
Ooh.
Which those are primarily going to be the teams that they're going to play against, and so when you're playing against teams like Ohio, Miami, Bowling Green, Ohio State, Akron. Those are 5 teams that I have, have ahead of them right now. And, if you're losing, 4 out of those 5 games, it's going to be hard to get back in. And they're also sitting, at 20th right now. And so it's going to be a little bit hard to claw up the ladder a little bit from that regard.
Yeah.
Kentucky, it's just really hard to say where they are as a program right now. I think that their biggest adversity thing is going to be, or their biggest reason for why they can be within the top 16, I should say, is if they beat up on some of the South teams. So if they go into like a Southern Dodgeball Cup, they knock down North Georgia a peg, they knock down Georgia Southern, they knock down Northwestern State, University of Louisiana, and maybe they at somewhere along the lines they can also pick up a win against like a Cincinnati. Those are going to be the types of games that they're going to have to win, but they're also going to have to make sure that they get out there and go do it. So
yeah,
easier said than done from time to time, but that's what they're going to have to do. And then West Virginia, I think unfortunately, I think if we were to like start fresh right now, they have the talent to, get in there. But right now they're sitting at number 27, and I think it's going to be near impossible for them to be able to like claw their way up enough, to move up the rankings a ton. You'd have to see them probably realistically go like win 4 straight games, against teams like UVA, Cleveland State, Cincinnati. And that's a tough schedule to ask a team to go 4-0 over, but they are capable of it in spurts. So that's kind of where I am in that regard. And our lists are more or less the same, so we don't need to go too much into that. But
yeah, the only difference I have is it's just Penn State just being on the outside and North Georgia being on the inside. And really, I mean, it can go either way for either team. Just both teams have just got to play more games, essentially, and that's really going to tell us how things going to play out.
Yep. All right, last thing that we're going to talk about, we won't touch too much on it, but we've got the big dates set up for our big tournaments for next semester. So Michigan Dodgeball Cup, February 8th at Michigan State University.
Yep.
Beast 9, which is hosted by JMU, is going to be February 15th. We've got the Ohio Dodgeball Cup, which is going to be hosted February 22nd. We've got Xanderthon 5, which, from what it sounds like this year, is going to be more or less the midway, like, Dodgeball Cup equivalent, which is going to be on February 29th. We've got War, the 4th installment of the War, which is hosted by University of Akron, and that's going to be March 7th through 8th. And then ultimately the granddaddy of them all, Nationals, which is going to be hosted by Ohio State Tournament on April 18th and 19th. So those are the ones to definitely look out for. Shadid and I are going to do our best to try and make it out to those and, get all the good dodgeball content out there and, hopefully see some of the teams that we said that we haven't had a chance to see a ton of. But we're definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah. Also, too, Towson should be playing on the 29th.
Okay.
And they have enough teams, it might make it to a 2-day tournament.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's everything that I wanted to talk about. You got anything else you want to add?
No, because it's currently at 2:15 in the morning, and it's definitely way past my bedtime.
All right, man. Well, this has been a good podcast, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it has.
I can see that the Z's are starting to kick in a little bit, but
normally I'm more talkative on broadcast, but when it's midnight and past, whatever. But it's been fun. We will definitely do more of these, and we'll definitely have things a little bit more scheduled, so it won't last past 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Talk to you guys later.
Later.